Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Eastern Planning Committee. My name is Penny Rivers and I am chair of this committee. May I ask you to please keep your statements brief and to the point. We will be timing speeches this evening and an alarm will sound when you've been speaking for 4 minutes. And councillors, you must hear the entire debate on each application in order to vote on it. So we come to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Louise, are there any?
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor John Gray and Councillor Liz Townsend. Councillor Richard Seaborn is present as a substitute for Councillor Gray, and Councillor Follows is present as a substitute for Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. And agenda item number 2, minutes of the last meeting. Would you be so kind as to confirm the minutes of the meetings held on 9th of March and 16th of March? And would you please signify that you agree those minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Louise, are there any?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. And questions by members of the public. Are there any?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions by members. Louise.
We have one question submitted by Councillor Richard Seaborn, who is present to read his question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd appreciate clarification from officers on the application of local planning policy to extensions which fall within the green belt, but are also within a defined settlement boundary. Planning application WA 2021-0306 for a 2-storey extension in the village of Hascombe was approved under delegated powers in May 2021. Objectors took this approval to judicial review and approval was subsequently squashed on a variety of procedural grounds. At the request of Hascombe Parish Council, I called the updated determination, which still recommended approval, to committee, and this was scheduled to be heard in February 2022. But as members will remember, this was withdrawn at the last minute because all of the material from the judicial review had not been considered. Subsequently, officers reversed their decision, and on the 11th of March, a refusal was issued on the grounds that the proposal, by reason of its bulk, mass, and scale, represents a disproportionate addition over and above the size of the original building. The proposal, therefore, represents inappropriate greenbelt development, which is harmful by definition. No very special circumstances exist to outweigh this harm, and the proposal is therefore contrary to policy RE2 of the local plan. My request is for officers to explain how the grounds used in the refusal relate to saved policy RD2 from the 2002 local plan, which is still in force, and its replacement policy DM14 in local plan part 2, which is currently out for examination. These two policies, the relevant parts of which I supplied with the question, but I won't regurgitate them for everybody, but those were supplied to officers, very clearly distinguish between applications inside and outside a settlement boundary. That distinction is not discussed in the final determination of that particular application. I'm not seeking to revisit the final determination of WA 2021-0306, since the applicants have opted to put in a revised application, which is acceptable to the objectors. But I do think it is helpful and appropriate that members are clearly advised on the relevance of saved policy RD2 and successor policy DM14, and whether these policies still have a role in determining applications for extensions in the Greenbelt. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn, for your question. There isn't a prepared answer this evening, so officers will take your question away and give you an answer, a full answer in due course. Chris, did you want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it is a complex issue. We will come as urgently as we can back with an answer on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just as a matter of point of clarification, Madam Chair, this question has been with officers for 2 weeks. I find it a little surprising that something which should be reasonably straightforward has taken this long and we still don't have an answer. However, I look forward with interest and I hope the response will be copied to all members because I raise this for everybody's benefit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we come to agenda item number 6, which is any relevant updates to any government guidance or legislation since we last met. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. There's no updates in that regard.
Thank you. Now we come to applications. There are none for public speaking. And so we come to our first application, which is WA 2021-02308, land south of Dunsfold Road and east of High Loxley Road, for the erection of a cattle finishing unit. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, there is a verbal update for this application. Members are advised that this application has now been appealed on non-determination. Upon the receipt of the appeal, and the planning inspectorate becomes the determining authority. The council can no longer issue a formal decision on this application. However, regardless of the appeal, and in order to decide how the council proceed, members are invited to consider the application tonight in the normal way, with a view to issuing a decision setting out what the council would have done should the council be in a position to determine the application. On the basis that the application should be considered in the normal, on that basis, the application should be considered in the normal way, with the only difference being that a non-formal decision is issued to the applicant and the inspectorate following the meeting. The officer recommendation therefore changes from grant to that should the council have been in a position to issue a decision, we would recommend the application be granted subject to the conditions and informatives. The application before you is for the erection of a cattle finishing unit sited on land to the south of Dunsfold Road and east of High Loxley Road. Members may recall that this application was deferred at the January Eastern Planning Committee. During the committee,
Sorry.
oh, was it not? Sorry. This aerial image shows the location of the proposal and provides context to the surroundings. I do note that a barn has been erected in close proximity to the application site, which isn't depicted on this image. The application site comprises agricultural land. At present, one storage barn is located just to the west of this application site. Members may be familiar with the site as a recent application relating to a temporary agricultural workers mobile home was considered at committee in November last year. The proposal seeks permission for the erection of the cattle finishing unit. The building would be large in plan, however, would be located on an area of land which naturally dips. The building would be provided some screening in the form of woodland to the east. By overlaying the location plan onto the aerial image, I hope it's demonstrated more clearly. The boundaries of the surrounding agricultural land would also provide some screening from the surrounding views. The block plan shows the relationship of the proposed barn and that of the existing storage barn on the site. The proposed agricultural building will also utilise the existing access. On this slide, there's the proposed block plan and the previous site plan. Members had raised that the red line didn't allow for any manoeuvring of vehicles or sort of ancillary areas around the barn. So the red line has since been amended. The plans for the cattle unit indicate that the building is typical in design of an agricultural building, suitable for the intended use to house livestock. The report includes a section on page 58 of the agenda pack outlining the agricultural justification for the proposal. The buildings considered to be reasonably necessary for the purpose of agriculture, and as stated on shown drawings, contains no additional floor space or accommodation over and above that which is required for an agricultural purpose. The view available from Hascombe Hill has been raised by many during the application, and as such, it's important to put this into context. The image on the left is the view available from Hascombe Hill. You may be able to see the existing barn in the photograph, and the proposal would be of a similar height to this, given the lower ground level that it is proposed on. The orientation of the proposal also means that the shortest or smallest elevation will be visible from Hascombe Hill. The images on the right are of a similar agricultural development within the area, also visible from Hascombe Hill. Officers consider in detail the impact upon the landscape at section 12 of the officer report, concluding with that the proposal would not likely appear as an incongruent feature within the landscape, particularly in the context of Dunsfold in the background of vistas from Hascombe Hill. The key matters for consideration are the impact upon the rural landscape, agricultural justification for the scheme, and the impact on residential amenity. The officer recommendation, as stated in the verbal update, has been amended to, should the council have been in a position to issue a decision, we would recommend that the application be granted subject to conditions and informatives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coster, I think you were the first.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wanted really to raise an issue about the consideration of this rather than the substance of the application, which maybe I'll come to later if we do go on to consider it. I just really wanted to understand. I mean, clearly, this is not the first application that's been appealed on grounds of non-determination. And I think I just wanted to better understand, have we as an authority previously, I'm conscious I haven't been on the committee for more than a few years, have we previously brought applications here where this has happened? I can imagine quite big applications sometimes where it takes a long time to deal with them and the developer gets a bit fed up and perhaps may want to appeal on non-determination. And if we have had others before, I'd like some understanding of whether we've got some guideline as to what circumstances we will bring one. And if we haven't ever had an application brought forward in these circumstances before, then my question is, why this one?
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. We have, in my time here, I can't recall an item that has been in this scenario where it's been waiting for committee and has then been appealed on non-determination. But oh, okay, that's okay. I can't recall an item that has. You have to, if you want to talk to Mike. Okay. Yeah, no, I can't recall an item that has recently, in my time at Waverley, been appealed on in the run up to a committee, but it does still need to be considered because we have to come to a view as to what we would have done, because ultimately the appeal process has begun and the officer recommendation is for approval. Therefore, we need to know what the committee would have done in order to be able to continue further down the appeal to advise the inspector whether we would have refused it or we would have approved it in line with the officer recommendation. So I have been aware of it taking place at other authorities, but I haven't seen it happen here.
Try and be absolutely clear then, is what you're saying that in any circumstances, although you're not aware of it happening before, in any circumstances in which it has been appealed for non-determination, then you would recommend, in other words, there could be others in the same circumstances going forward, that we should take a view so that we can be guided when we deal with the appeal. Is that the case? I'm not trying to catch anyone, just understand for the benefit of myself and the committee where we stand on this sort of application.
Yes, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So for instance, we have some where they have been, or where we have had them appealed on non-determination, but the item would have been a delegated item. And where that happens, we issue a decision similar to what you're considering today, where we say what we would have done in that instance. So because this is a committee item, then yes, we then want to know what you would have done in that instance.
No. Thank you, Councillor Cossett. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. So she leaning forward. Right, actually, I think I could take Councillor Coffer back a few years. I remember that we did have appeals against non-determination prior to my leaving the council in 2003. It is a long time ago and nobody wants to know about that anymore. Getting to the substance of this application, I have a couple of questions. And one of them, I know it is not a planning consideration, but please could I ask, do the cattle ever go outside in one of these finishing units? That's the first question. To address matters of policy really and interpretation, I saw on page 13 that there was a comment on the impact on High Billingshurst. I do take the view that that open grazing countryside is appropriate for running cattle, although of course, as I said before, I don't know if the cattle ever actually go out, but that is raising cattle in that sort of area is characteristic of this country actually. And I think that wedding activities can be conducted anywhere. I'm afraid, well, I have a lot of sympathy for High Billinghurst Farm with all the problems with Dunsfold not going ahead. I think in this case, I don't regard their situation as significant. There is one other thing in the report which I'd like to highlight, and that is a suggestion from the officers that the applicant would be happy. This is on page 12, item 1. The applicant would be happy to accept a condition pertaining to a drainage scheme, which would include infiltration potential for disposing of surface water by means of a sustainable drainage system, SUDS. I think that that is a very large area that is covered, the roof of this building. And I think I'd be happier if that condition were in there, if the applicant is willing, as we have heard. I think that's all I have to say, except I'd like an answer, please, to the question.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. So, Chris, is that you or Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. So the question of do the cattle go outside? I believe that the main use of this building is that cattle will be brought to the site, this building, and it is effectively a means of enclosure before they go to slaughter. So I believe, and from conversations with the applicant, when his cows go to slaughter, he has to pay an additional fee to keep them there for 24 to 48 hours prior to slaughter to make sure that they are clear from mouth to end. And this is what that unit takes away. So I believe that no, they wouldn't be going outside. In relation to High Billingshurst, I'm pretty sure that section 19 covers the impacts on High Billingshurst. It's a fair distance away from the application site, and the use of this building is agricultural. There will be cows on the site in the building. There's, in my mind, there's little difference of the impact on odour and things, whether those cows are in a building or they're outside. The use is agricultural. So, and in terms of the condition, the lead local flood authority is not a statutory consultee in this case. However, if members decided or came to a conclusion that they would like to have that condition added, then that's something we can add. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Councillor Gale, followed by Councillor Else, followed by Councillor Dinas, and then I'll give you some more. So Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. The use of the unit is a cattle finishing unit, which in condition number 3, it says permitted use for agricultural purposes only, which is understandable. My question would be, if it's a cattle finishing unit, do they need stockmen living on site or nearby to deal with the cattle? Because we've seen other uses of buildings where eventually they say they need stockmen to live on site in porta cabins or whatever. So if this particular use doesn't need a stockman to live on site, if they wanted to change the use, would they have to come back for a different planning application, although it's giving them permission for agricultural purposes?
Thank you. Tracy.
Thank you. I believe if they wanted to change the use from agriculture, once permitted, they would need to come in with a separate permission to change that use.
Yes, but agriculture could cover many things. I mean, they could turn the barn or whatever it is into a lambing facility or something where they would need people living 24 hours of the day to tend to the lambs. So therefore they would put in an application for someone to live on site. Whereas this obviously doesn't need somebody living on site. So can it be restricted to a performance which doesn't need a stockman to be living actually on site?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, if you felt that it had to be only as a cattle finishing unit, then that's something that you could narrow the, like you say, it could be used for anything in terms of agriculture. And if members felt it was appropriate as a cattle finishing unit, but potentially not as other agricultural uses, then yes, you could look at a condition that would be that it's only for that use within agriculture.
Can I say, yeah, so in that case, the permission would be granted and definitely no habitable accommodation on that piece of land or buildings or whatever. Is that okay? Is that a possibility?
Chris, do you want to further confirm that?
We'd have to consider anything else that comes forward on its own merits. So at the moment, we're just considering the finishing unit that's being proposed. If they were to make a case that there was justification for a dwelling, we'd have to consider that at that time. Yeah, that's all we can.
Madam Chairman, could I possibly interject my point, because it builds on that, which is that there is already an application that's come in for a house and a further outbuilding. And my point was going to be, I find it very difficult to consider this application in isolation as we need to, when there is already clear evidence of further extensive development on the site. And if you look at the plans on the subsequent application and the footprints of built form in this area, it's increasing at least tenfold. And if we can't take account of the subsequent application, I think we should at least deplore it. But one of the answers to the questions is that the applicant and his family will look after the cattle here. They need to be able to look after the cattle here. And it does seem to me that on an agricultural justification in isolation, this application doesn't stack up. I just find it very difficult one to get my head round when quite clearly something much bigger is planned. So I think I would be minded to try and say that it's only this application can't proceed because it doesn't stack up agriculturally because of the lack of accommodation.
Thank you. Tracy, do you want to add anything to that?
I do appreciate what Councillor Hegan is saying. We must, well, the thing is, we must assess the application that's before us on its own merits. We can't force applicants to submit applications in a certain way if they choose to do it in such a way that is piecemeal. What I would say is it's quite a strange situation that the applicant is left in that initially he was to purchase the land that he now owns with the farmhouse that is just to the northeast. However, the seller died, and then I think it was other family members decided not to then sell the farmhouse. So the applicant has the land, he owns the land, but he doesn't have a base anymore. So I think you know, there is some justification for this site. It's a very strange one. Reading Agricultural have been consulted on the previous application, which we didn't feel needed to be updated for this application. And the dwelling, I think we need to go back and reconsult them, and they need to, they will be providing a response on that application. And like I say, we have to deal with that on its own merits as well. But I do appreciate what you're saying. It's tough.
But I mean, I think I'd listen to what other people say, but I would like to come back to the point that if the answer to the question is the farmer and his family need to look after the cattle and they don't have accommodation adjacent to enable them to do so, I do feel that this application is potentially not supportable on agricultural grounds. And then you add that to the fact that it's so much larger than the mobile home that we refused on the basis that it would have its impact on the ANOB. I would like to potentially look at a reason that encompasses both of those aspects.
Thank you, Councillor Hegan. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a point of clarification, really. I notice on our report, pages 18 and 19, we have a location and a block plan which appear to be from the last application rather than the current application. And I'd just like your clarification, officers, that the drawing numbers listed in condition number 1 show the new site plan and block location plan and block plan, and not these old ones, because these old ones we decided at the last when we considered it before, we decided that it just wasn't workable for a truck to go up and deliver cows and then reverse all the way back out down to the road.
Okay, thank you. We have Councillor Denis and then Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Denis, please.
Thank you. Are we still on questions, or because if we are, I'll defer for the time being.
We're still on question.
Yes, I'll defer then.
Councillor Goodridge.
Yeah, well, one question has been asked already by Councillor Else. A question I wanted to ask on page 11, paragraph 18, Dunstable Parish Council has objected to the application on the following grounds. The siting of the mobile home would have an adverse effect on the landscape. Is this an accurate objection, bearing in mind we're not dealing with the application for a mobile home? Paragraph, page 11, paragraph 18, first bullet point, talks about the siting of the mobile home. And we're not dealing with a mobile home, we're dealing with a great big building. So that's one question I wanted to ask. The second question I wanted to ask was this. I am confused as to exactly what this building is going to be used for and for how long for cattle. It describes it as a cattle finishing unit. Planning officers mentioned that you know, the cattle will come in just for a very short period, check them for TB, and then they'll be off again. My understanding would be that these cattle would be in this shed for months and months while they fatten up. Is that right, or what is this? I mean, how long are the cattle going to be in this shed being fattened up? Because certainly when you look at page 9, the top paragraph, reasonably necessary, it talks about, it doesn't necessarily say what, that he purchases them at 18 months old and rears them until finishing weight within a 12-month period. And then we talk about it further down as a cattle finishing unit. Now, do the cattle arrive at 18 months and get finished off in this barn and then get taken away? Or do these cattle arrive and eat grass all around the neighborhood and then come into it just for the last week or two, but check them for TB, and then they disappear off on a lorry for the abattoir? I'm just confused as to how this shed is going to, well, not shed, how this large building is going to be used. So that's my second question. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure on the length of time that the cows were in the shed. When I met the applicant on site, he said it was a sort of a short-term thing, but obviously the agricultural information states that it could be up to 12 months. However, I don't think it's a planning matter that needs to be debated. Thank you.
With the greatest respect, it is relevant to the traffic movements, because if these cattle are going to be permanent residents for some distance, some time, that's one thing. If they're going to be coming and going every week or two, it's another matter, in my view.
Okay, we have Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I maybe can shed a little light from my own experiences. Having been on as trustee of Cranley and South Eastern Agricultural Society, I'm familiar with these buildings, and also I travel to Henley regularly, and at Sonning, the Eye on the River Thames, there's a very nice hotel called the French Horn, and right next to it is a cattle finishing unit. And the cattle are brought in for a period of months and given feed, but they don't go outside, and that I understand is the finishing unit. So it's not just for a short period of time, it'll be maybe a season, you know, the 4 seasons in the year. So that's what I would like to say. And it works perfectly well right next to a very nice hotel on the Thames. And that was my comment, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. Councillor Costa, I think you wanted to speak again.
Well, I'll defer my comments on the application to later. The question I was going to ask is actually covered by Michael Woodridge. I had the same section underlined, but my question was going to be, and I'm not sure we actually had an answer to it. Are we sure, given that the comments from Dunsfold appear to talk about the mobile home application, that their comments that we've been given actually relate to this application?
Thank you. Yes, the comments that they've given do relate to this application. It was a typo within my report. I think when I came to the January Eastern Planning Committee, I'd done a verbal or written update to check it off, but obviously being the same application, I've used the same report and just amended and added parts in, and I've missed that bit, so I apologise.
Thank you. Oh,
Again, I think has been covered to some extent. I was just going to ask for clarification before we debate this. about the issue, which just seems to be rumbling around the back of this. There's clearly a suspicion somewhere down the line that you put this unit in and they're there for a long time. They're therefore going to need, constant attention, and therefore we're going to be setting ourselves up for a subsequent application for residential development of some kind. And I think you gave it, but I want to be absolutely clear that should that happen, that will be a matter for a separate application to this committee.
Tracy.
Thank you. Are you asking to call in the application for the dwelling?
Simply asking if we gave permission for the application we have in front of us, that it has no implication for any subsequent application, and it would have to be considered separately if somebody wanted to make a case that the operation of this unit required substantial residential accommodation to enable the cattle to be looked after or fed or whatever it was, because I think that's been rumbling around some of the comments.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. It is an interesting question, and ultimately, when we issue a decision, it does become a material consideration for a subsequent application. So we haven't in the officer report raised any concern that this would lead to the need for a dwelling, but and therefore would have an impact in terms of other permissions, but it would become a material consideration should an application be should an application be granted, then it becomes a material consideration for the next submission. I don't have any other information in that regard, but it would be material at that point.
Thank you. In order of speakers, we then have Councillor Seaborne, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Darcy. So Councillor Seaborne, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since I'm subbing this evening, I wasn't party to the previous debate, and I was recruited as a sub fairly late in the day. So I probably could have asked this question earlier had I been on the game earlier, but I'm late and I want to be absolutely clear for the benefit of the subsequent decisions. Can officers clarify to me exactly what the governing policy will be when we're making the decision on this? Because if you look at local plan part 1, you look at emerging local plan part 2 and MPPF, you may well come up with a different decision to what you would come up with if you include policies that have not been closed down yet from the SAVE policies from the local plan 2002. So we have policy RD8 on farm diversification, and this is clearly diversification because there hadn't been a cattle finishing unit there before, so the owner's clearly diversifying. And it says there, in countryside beyond the green belt, new buildings will only be permitted, whereas no suitable existing buildings are available, and where the proposed buildings are small scale and unobtrusively located. And then policy RD10 on agricultural development says permission will be granted for agricultural, horticultural and forestry related developments, provided, and part B of this, that they would not significantly detract from the character of the rural landscape. And part C, the location, scale, design and colour of materials are appropriate for the character and appearance of the surrounding areas. So as I said, I think if we start with the more modern policy, I would reach one conclusion. If we're considering policy which still seems to be in existence, then I'm swayed in a slightly different direction. So I think it'd be helpful for us to have some guidance on that, please. Thank you.
Tracy, is that, or Chris?
Thank you. The policies are referenced in the report. I'll just get it out. RD10 is the SAVE policy from the local plan 2002 that the agricultural development has been assessed against.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, we have to look at those 2002 policies insofar as they are consistent with the MPPF. So what we have said is that policy still, we would still attach significant weight to. So it's not one that's completely inconsistent, for instance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I sat through the last meeting before we deferred this, and I thought it was a very badly put forward project because we were given more questions than answers. Now, I am minded, having looked through the officer's report and bearing in mind that we cannot take it other than as a single item, to think that the questions that we deferred it on have been answered. And I am minded now to follow the officer's advice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Darcy.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions which I'll just put to you. There's an existing barn. What's the footprint of that barn? That's the first question. Second is, how many cattle are likely to be in the building at any one time? That's the second question. The third question we probably already discussed, but it's, will the cattle be kept in all year? The fourth question is, how are the cattle housed? Are there cubicles or is it open plan? Fifth question is, will there be separate bedding areas for the cattle to lie down? And will there be an exercise area for the cattle? And then finally, is there a fence around it? So that the indication on the plan is that there's a narrow space, but beyond that space, is there some sort of fence so that if cattle get out, they can't just go out into the fields or whatever?
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. So the footprint of the existing barn, I don't know. I could scale it off of a plan potentially. We have got a photograph, yes, but do you want to know in meters squared? I couldn't tell you a meter square because I can't scale off a plan right now. In terms of the number of cows, I'm not sure. Is it open plan? There is a floor plan at the end of the report, so which suggests it's also, sorry, I could just go back to this one. So there is looks open plan, exercise area, none specified, and the fence, there is no fencing as part of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Councillor Sadler. We'll come back to you, Christine. Councillor Sadler.
Thank you, Chair. I can't see a floor plan in the papers that I've got. And secondly, I was wondering, whatever ruling we make, will it be recorded on the plan history, or if we grant it and subsequently it's not granted, what happens on the planning history?
Thank you, Chair. The apologies, we've just checked the floor plan in terms of the plans pack. It is as is shown on the slide, but apologies, it's not on in the pack. But in terms of what would happen as a decision, obviously the application has been appealed, so we're not issuing a formal decision, but we're saying what we would have done. So it wouldn't go on whilst that documents, that detail would go on the file. It wouldn't be recorded as a formal decision. It'd be then for the inspector to decide the application, or for them to decide how they proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Denis, did you want to speak?
Sorry, can we have an answer to the question about the block plan that the Vice Chairman raised? Because it does make a difference to our debate if we have the wrong plan in front of us, because it shows no turning area. It says it's an amended plan, and it doesn't seem to me.
Well, it should be fairly easy to find. You just look up the application documents.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can't look them up in the normal way that we would. So we're just going through the website. However, the amended plans were received in February. So the assessment's been made on the new plans. If it's found that I haven't changed the condition numbers for the plans, that's something that we can do afterwards. We can sort that out. It's not a potential issue. We would need to just check the numbers on the plans and the revisions of each plan.
Chairman, it may be the turning area is in the area between the barn we saw and where the mobile home was going to be put, but I would like to know whether that is the case or not.
Madam Chairman, could I just say I have found the answer to Councillor Darcy's question on the floor area, which is 146.143 square metres.
10 out of 10. Yeah. Councillors, we just have Lewis on Zoom.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. I just wanted to briefly comment on the issue members have expressed in relation to the prospect of there being a future dwelling being applied for. I completely agree with officers that if the applicant did want that, then they certainly would need to apply for planning permission for that. But the extent to which one regards this application and development as enabling development for a future dwelling house, I think is a matter of planning judgment for members. The prospect of the applicant using this development as justification for a dwelling in the future, I think is a material planning consideration. So I think it's okay for members to take that into consideration, but I think the question is how much weight members should be giving that. And obviously that is a matter of planning judgment for members to take into consideration. But I hope that clarifies the situation a little bit. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lewis.
So we believe that condition 1 will need to be updated following the meeting. However, the updated block plan was shown on the presentation and is available for what has been available on the website since February, clearly marked as amended plans. So we would need to update that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Now, I think we have 2 other speakers. I think it's Christine, Councillor Baker and Councillor Gale, but Councillor Denis hasn't spoken as yet. Well, I'm not positive. It depends what they're saying, I think. Councillor Baker.
I'm happy for Councillor Denis to speak. I think my comments will be about the debate and not.
Councillor Denis.
Thank you for that. Countryside beyond the green belt. This is AGLV, and we've got H and Woodland, and we've got a listed building. This is 210 foot long and 80 foot wide. And if you want to compare that, a Boeing 747 is only 7 meters longer. We talk about SUDs, absolutely no evidence to show that it's going to work. And the traffic movements, those who know High Loxley Road will know what a terrible road that is. Landscape appraisal refers to the traveller site as a significant detracting feature. And it says it's therefore all the more important to protect the remaining rural landscape rather than industrialise it further. It also says about Bridleway 280, the proposed barn will be prominent in the view and like the existing barn will be close to breaking the skyline. Glimpse views of Hascombe's Hill would be retained between the buildings. So from the Bridleway, Hascombe Hill will be barely visible and will be dominated by a huge building in the foreground. Viewpoint 8, strategically taken behind a range of trees, holly trees in High Loxley Lane, but if they'd have taken that picture a few yards further, the proposed industrial unit would be in full view. So we know it's in the countryside beyond the green belt and an AGLV. Policy RE1 states that the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside will be recognised and safeguarded in accordance with NPPF. That's paragraph 174. Policy RE3 says the landscape character sets out the same principles protecting the ANOB will apply to the area of AGLV, which will be retained for its own sake and as a buffer to the ANOB. And until there's a review of the boundary on this, we have to accept that is commensurate with its status as a local landscape designation. We've got emerging policy DM1, which requires development should not cause harm or damage to existing environmental assets, such as areas of landscape value, maximise opportunities to enhance such assets. And paragraph 176 of the NPPF says great weight should be given to conserving and enhancing the landscape and scenic beauty in AONOB, which has the highest status of protection. It says the scale and extent of development within these designated areas should be limited, while development within their setting should be sensitively located and designed to avoid or minimise adverse impacts. Policy SP2 states major development on land of the highest amenity and landscape value, such as the Surrey Hills AONOB, will be avoided, and Safe Policy RD10 of the 2002 plan states permission will be granted for agricultural development, provided it would not significantly detract from the character of the rural landscape. Supporting text states the proposals within ANOB and AGLV will be examined particularly carefully to ensure the character and amenity of the countryside is not adversely affected. I think it fails on every hurdle. I do need to talk about, I think we should talk about the appeal and what came out on that. but this application, although slightly to the east, is 43 times larger than the caravan. 43 times larger. I'm sure everybody has looked at the grounds that we refused the caravan. And I'd say all of those grounds absolutely still appeal. And if I may come back at the end, I'd be grateful.
Thank you. Councillor Baker, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say that I set out really thinking what was wrong with this application, and I've listened very hard, and that is what we're supposed to do, hear each other. And what I've heard, I'm afraid, disposes me to say that we should refuse this application. And I'm all for, broadly speaking, enterprise in the countryside, and particularly with agriculture. But I think that there are so many things wrong with this, in particular its size. So it just seems inappropriate. And you have heard Councillor Dinas give all the grounds, the policy grounds. So I think I'm not going to give you a laundry list, but I will be, I'm afraid, voting against. And I'm assuming that because this is an appeal, that we do, if we refuse, need to give our reasons as usual. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gale.
Yes, thank you. We've heard from the officers that the gentleman that owns all these fields has actually no dwelling because of circumstances. So we're being asked to grant permission on a building for a specific purpose, which it appears is not possible to continue unless there are stockmen living on site. Now, I'm not sure we should be giving permission for something to be built in the field, which actually can't be used for the purpose that it's being built for. It'd be a bit like trying to give permission for igloos in the Sahara or something, wouldn't it? Because you can't use it without somebody living on site, as far as we're aware. I don't know, I don't do cattle finishing, but it appears that way to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to go back to something that Lewis mentioned just now, and that was treating this as an enabling development for a dwelling. And I just wonder if that is a material consideration for our deliberations. Is this something that, should we be minded to go against the officer's recommendation, is this something that we could use as a reason for refusal, should it come to that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Either.
Lewis, would you like to help with that question, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think, well, my view is that the prospect of a dwelling becoming necessary could be a material planning consideration in the determination of this application, although I would encourage members to think carefully about the weight that they would attach to that consideration and consider their reasons for thinking that one might be necessary. I would caution against possibly basing a reason for refusal on the application for that reason alone. I would encourage members to move back to policy, but I do think in the round it is material to tonight's determination.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cotter.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Like everybody else, I struggled a bit with this at times, but as always, I think one has to revert to the information we have and to try and consider the application on its merits and within the policy structure. I understood, and I'm not unsympathetic to the points that Councillor Dinas made, but I know that the building is large, but it's not a caravan. And it's not a mobile home. it is as large as it may be, and I don't know enough about farming to know how bigger and smaller barns, are getting these days. But from what I've seen of it, it is not an inappropriate building to have in an agricultural setting, and that first and foremost, I think, is weighs fairly heavily with me in terms of the weight we have to provide. Now, I have been concerned, as I know other members have been, about whether, I think I used the word ruse or enabling might be a more polite term, that if that is what it's about. But having just heard the words of our officers on that, I think on balance, what I would wish to do is take the view that we consider this on its merits. The building on its own in terms of the application is not unacceptable, and our officer's advice, which I've read like everybody else very carefully, I think supports that view. And if this does become a material consideration, if and it is an if, there is a subsequent application, then we will have to deal with it in those terms. The only thing, so I'm going to probably support the officer recommendations on this. The only thing I would like to express some concern about is that I didn't quite feel in reading this application, I'm not often critical of some of the reports we get and so on, that there was a lot of understanding about how this building would operate. And I think a lot of the questions, have been based on that. And I'm not asking them, and I'm not expecting our planning officers to become experts in things they don't need to be experts in. But given some of the discussions that there were before around this, I think some more detail about whether it was actually likely to lead to that sort of situation arising, in which it would need fairly intensive labour effort of some kind, would have been helpful. But it's not going to affect, I think, my decision, unless I hear it's something in the latter stages of the debate on a new basis that I feel I'm bound to support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Cossett. Councillor Goodridge, and then that possibly is the last of the debate, is it? Oh, Councillor Dean.
Don't ask me.
Oh, right.
Madam Chairman, could the officers just show me the block plan, please, or at least the site plan, which is going backwards, I think. Yeah, because Councillor Hegan has very kindly shown me the amended site plan, which of course is different from that, in that it goes all round from the north of the narrow entrance. There's quite a large lump, including a turning circle to the left of the new barn, I think, and so on and so forth. So the plan in our report is not correct. It's the same as is in our papers, which is incorrect. And I'm just keen that if we make a decision, we are aware of things that aren't accurate. The second point is that I don't think the officer mentioned the supplemental report concerning the wild wildlife and the removal of a hedgerow, unless I missed it. But I think for completeness, we ought to at least have on record that we do have a supplemental paper in front of us relating to the Surrey Wildlife Trust views, which is before us. And I think that ought to be recorded, please, and commented on if there is. I remember you talking about the verbal update, but I don't remember the other update being referred to us. I'm just keen to ensure that when we make a decision, we do have all the facts correct in front of us, because otherwise if it had been our decision and we were appealing on our decision, we'd be looking a little foolish, I fear. And from my point of view, the way I see it is this, that there is the policy where it's a little on a knife edge. Councillor Cossett, Councillor Denis taking a different view, and I'm bending slightly towards Councillor Denis, I have to say. And the decision would be affected by how long the cattle are staying there, because it seems to me that if the cattle are just popping in and popping out on a sort of bed and breakfast just there for a few nights, you need a certain amount of labour. If they're permanent residents for up to a year, as is being suggested by Councillor Reid, who knows about these things, and the cattle are going to be there for a longer time, we need more labour, then the enabling accommodation that might be related to it, as advised by our legal department, is more important. And on balance, I came with one view when I came tonight, and I've got a slightly different view now, in that I think that on balance, this application should be refused on the basis of the facts as I understand them.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. We have Councillor Martin Darcy and then Councillor Denis and Councillor Richard Seaborn. So Councillor Darcy.
Thank you. What I was going to ask or discuss was the principle of development, which says that policy RD10, which Councillor Seaborn mentioned, says that it would be granted for agricultural related development, provided it relates to an existing unit, so that's the first bit, is reasonably necessary for the purposes of agriculture and would not significantly detract from the character of the rural landscape. So I've got two issues with that. The first is what we mean by an existing unit. So clearly in this case, there is a barn on the site. Well, it's not actually, it's only on part of the site, because we've worked out that the existing barn is 146 meters squared, whereas the square meters, sorry, whereas the proposed barn is 1,562. So that's 10 times larger. So to me, that's not on an existing site. That's actually creating an entirely new and very much larger site, 10 times bigger. So that is the first no-no, I think. The second, we had a discussion about the scale of it. And I mean, I'm not an expert in agricultural barns, but I think a 64 by 24 meter barn, 8 meter tall, high, is actually pretty big, you know, even in places like Lincolnshire, where they know about big farming. And let's be honest, Surrey farming is not big farming in that sense, but that's a big, big barn. Okay, so then it's not on the existing footprint. And the other concern I would have is that I don't think we're given all the information that we need, because, for example, we asked about slurry last time, and we were told that the animals will be bedded on deep littered yards and only solid farmyard manure will be produced. And that's going to be stored within the building. So that means, I presume, that the animals are going to be actually on top of the straw. That's kind of how you normally do it in a deep littered thing. The cows will be on top of the straw, they poo into it, and then at some point you have to come along and you have to take all of the poo affected straw, which is what farmyard manure is, essentially. So what that means is the cattle will be on top of the straw, so a machine's going to have to come along every so often and dig it all out. So where's this machinery going to be stored? That's a question I have. And how often will this have to happen? Because we're going to have machinery storage, we're going to have food storage, which apparently is going into the existing barn. Where's the machinery going to be stored? The manure apparently is going to be stored in the same barn as the bedding, which I presume they mean the clean bedding. So there's clean bedding, there's manure, and then there's a cattle all in the same barn. This strikes me as there's going to be a lot of traffic moving about, because I'll have to continually come in and take out the manure. And what they're going to do in the winter, when they won't be able to spread it, or sorry, in the summer when they won't be able to spread it on the fields. Because normally I think you do that in sort of spring and autumn. Now, so there's a lot of questions about how much traffic. And again, we don't know how long the cattle are going to be there. So we don't know whether there's beginning every week there's going to be a lorry coming in, or every 6 months. So I think that there are a lot of questions to me that suggest that I tend to agree with Councillor Denis, and I would be minded and not to, or to refuse this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Denis and Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Denis.
Thank you. I just want to turn to page 13, and it says, at this distance and with the prevailing winds not directed towards Hyde Billinghurst Farm, there will be no adverse impact in terms of noise or odour. Unfortunately, we don't have control of the wind, and the wind blows both ways. So to put that in, I thought was fairly ridiculous because it will impact on that farm. It has weddings outside, so that point needs to be made. I'll just turn quickly to the recent application which we dealt with for the caravan. And it was refused on the siting of it would fail to safeguard the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside and AGLV and the setting of the Surrey Hills AONB to the north. Furthermore, justification does not outweigh that harm. So that's a caravan. It was refused on those grounds, which was policies RE1, RE3, retained policies RD10 and MPPF. It's been mentioned about Surrey wildlife, about the loss of 100 foot in hedgerow. They suggested an ecologist complete an ecological walkthrough or walkover would officially provide the LPA confidence on the impacts on ecology and hedgerow. It says it may be suitable for reptiles, amphibians and dormouse. They have suggested an environmental plan for avoiding impacts on birds and ecology. It's suggested a separate condition, and I think there's a number of conditions that are missing. When you look at the site, there's an email dated the 26th to Tracy, and it says, "Hi Tracy, this is from Surrey Wildlife. If that is the direction the project is taking, then that is a risk to the applicant, i.e. no surveys to inform the impact assessment." What about the impact on wildlife? But if granted, then it would be advisable to have a construction environmental management place in plan. Where is this? You know, we've got so many questions still. Yeah, how can we be sure exactly what we're voting for? You know, I'm sorry to say, I think this report's got holes all the way through it, and I personally couldn't sign up to something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would like to...
Thank you. Apologies. Thank you, Chair. The update sheet does have the additional CMP condition in it. So obviously, officers have taken the view that we feel a condition would be appropriate in terms of ecology, and it's on page 3 of the update sheet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Final speaker, I hope, Councillor Seaborne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Darcy and I both have the privilege of representing the good residents of Hascombe, and this is on their minds. I was at their annual parish assembly on Monday, and the subject came up with several people. The things that are on their minds are the scale of the views from Hascombe Hill and the lighting issues. So were we minded to approve this, then I'd like the opportunity to come back and address conditions, because I think the conditions could be made stronger to give some protection against that. However, I didn't get a wholly satisfactory answer to my earlier question about existing policy. So it was made clear that existing policy does hold good. And I raised the question of policy RD8, saved policy RD8, which relates to farm diversification. And as far as I can see, this is diversification. There's no, the business that's going to go in there doesn't look anything like the business that is currently there. So they're doing something different. And if that does apply, and I welcome officers' comment on this, because I think it is all important. If that does apply, then, as I repeat, countryside beyond the green, but in the countryside beyond the green belt, new buildings will only be permitted where no suitable existing buildings are available, and where the proposed buildings are small scale and unobtrusively located, which this clearly doesn't satisfy. So it's all important as to whether that policy does apply, whether this is genuinely diversification or not. Okay, so 2 points there. Does that policy apply? And If it doesn't, and we are minded to approve, I'd like to come back on conditions when we get around to that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of policy RD8, the subtext refers to what we would expect diversification to be. And it says it includes activities such as woodland management, farm shops, pick your own equestrian enterprises, nature trails, fishing, holiday accommodation. So I think this is not a diversification so much as being purely for agriculture. So I would say that policy RD8 doesn't apply, but RD10 does.
Thank you. So councillors, we've had a very long debate. I have to tell you that at the beginning of this evening, my vice chairman's challenged me to keep the whole meeting to an hour. I don't think it's our fault. So we have a recommendation, and the recommendation is that this be granted subject to conditions and informatives. So shall we take a vote on that recommendation? Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. And those against? Thank you. Are there any abstentions? No, that's all of us.
Thank you, Chairman. That was 4 for and 10 against.
Thank you. So, do we have a proposal? Councillor Denis.
Yeah, obviously I propose that the application is refused. I'm sure I have somebody who will second that, and then I'm happy to go into what I think the grounds could be. I might not be correct in some of my action sections.
Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder. Would all in favour of objecting? I beg your pardon?
Discuss the reasons for
yes, we have to discuss the reasons for refusal. So Councillor Denis.
My apologies if I get some of my policies slightly wrong and all of that. But I think the first one has to be similar to the caravan, and that said, by its, and add a few words, it's by its size, bulk, appearance and sighting of it would fail to safeguard the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside and ADLV and the setting of the Surrey Hills ANOB. Furthermore, justification does not outweigh that harm. And I think if the policies are still correct, that's RE1, RE3 of Local Plan 2018 and retain policies RD10 and the MPPF. Obviously, play with the words. I think there's also, it needs to be about the application fails to conserve and enhance biodiversity to ensure that any adverse impacts are avoided, and if unavoidable, the opportunity hasn't been mitigated. Now, I'm not sure which policy, I can't remember which one that comes under. I do think there's an issue about public amenity with the building opposite, just in case that wind ever decides to blow that way. So the effect on the local business. Policy D1, and that's regards to the environmental implications of development, including potential pollution. I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure how all of that's going to work. I know we've had numerous questions to ensure development avoids harm to the health or amenity of occupants of nearby land and buildings from an unacceptable increase in pollution, odour and flood. I think that's RD 10 from 2002. And I think in that I would obviously put about the hedgerow, and that's built around the lack of knowledge about biodiversity, etc., etc. But please, colleagues, shout if I've missed anything or you want to add anything.
Tracy wanted to speak.
I would try and steer members away from the impacts upon odour and things to the nearby business. I consulted with environmental health about this application and they raised no concerns in that regard. The site is agricultural. The smells are still there now. I would guide members away from that. However, on the ecology details, I would recommend a condition that states in the absence of ecological surveys that insufficient information has been submitted to demonstrate that the proposal would not give rise to harm to protected species. Contrary to policy NE1 of the local plan part 1, D1 or the 2002 local plan, and in relation to the other issues, I think that it would be the council would be able to defend a conclusive reason. Yeah, and I propose the wording.
I think we I think the wording we've got here is pretty much what
Okay.
Councillor Dean had said then.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Yes, bearing in mind this is not the sole reason for refusing, can we add in that in the opinion of the council, granting permission would put pressure on accommodation as advised by our legal department, as an extra. I think we're advised that just refusing it on the basis it'll give pressure to have accommodation would not be wise, but bearing in mind how far we've gone so far, this could be a supplemental reason perhaps, and I would ask for officers' advice on that.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think given the discussion that you've had on that basis, that some wording along the lines, it has not been demonstrated that the proposal would not result in the need for further developments, and I would say including in the form of an additional dwelling. There was mention of other ancillary developments as well, so I think I'd say including rather than just simply, but that would be within the body of the reason that Councillor Denis had put forward. It would be some additional wording we put in the middle of that reason, if that was.
Okay. Okay, so officers, you're confident you have the wording, or you have the Councillor Denis, more.
No, not more. So I think Tracy said the one about the biodiversity, about protected species. Well, it's not just about protected species. And I just wonder whether that will narrow us down. So it's about biodiversity as well, not just protected species. So I'll just be uncomfortable with that word. I think it's just so narrow.
Noted, we could change harm to protected species to harm to ecology.
Thank you. So councillors, you have a recommendation for objection. Would all in favour of the objection please show? And those against the objection? And those abstaining?
Thank you, Chairman. That was 8 for and none against and 5 abstentions.
Thank you. Thank you all.
That only comes to 13.
Oh, we have
Paul's left.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
okay.
one absence.
Yeah.
So we come to an exciting bit now. We're going to change the agenda, everyone. We're going to have the listed planning consent second. We're going to take the proposal for Springfield Farm, Cattershall Lane, the planning permission first. So may I ask Adam?
Could I just ask before these are presented to us, if we could be told basis on which they've been brought to committee? We usually have a paragraph saying it's been called in, or it's an officer's relative or something like that, but we don't have it here.
Adam, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this item and the subsequent listed building consent items have been brought before the committee this evening because the applicant is a Waverley officer.
Thank you, Councillor Cotter. So Adam, would you like to present the application, please? Councillor Sadler. Oh, yes, please do. Please do. Okay, we will have 5 minutes then, please. Okay. A 5-minute break.
Well, we finished the discussion, Steve. So
Yeah,
I'm afraid you can't
sorry.
vote.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So Springfield Farm, Catchall Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. This application is for the alteration to an existing outbuilding to provide additional habitable accommodation. The site is Springfield Farm, just to the south of Cattershall Lane, and is located within the Greenbelt, AONB, and the AGLV. The red line on the plan photograph here indicates the location of the outbuilding in question. Here are some site photos showing the outbuilding. The photo on the left is the north-facing elevation, subject to the main alterations in this proposal. The photo on the right is the southern. Here we have the western elevation on the left-hand side with a view of the outbuilding in relation to the Grade 2 listed building on which it is curtilage listed. Here are the existing and proposed block plans for the application. As you can see from the plans, the proposal would not result in an increase in built form, and officers consider this to be an acceptable form of development within the Greenbelt. Here are the existing elevations. As you can see, there's minor fenestration on the northern elevation and on the eastern. And as you can see from the proposal here, much of the character of the existing fenestration is retained with the addition of some bay windows, new doors. Here are the existing proposed floor plans. As you can see, the parking would be retained inside the outbuilding, with the changes providing a new home gym, additional sleeping accommodation, en suites, and a home office. Phase 1 ecology report has been submitted with this application, which has identified the outbuilding in question as being a negligible habitat for bats, so bats are not a constraint on this development. The conservation team have been consulted on this and have identified no harm to the heritage assets, but this will be discussed in more detail for the listed building consent. Environmental health have raised no concerns over this proposed development. The main matters are for consideration are the design and impact on visual amenity, the AONB and the AGLV, its impact on the Greenbelt, the impact on residential amenity, and the impact on heritage assets. Officers are recommending this application for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any speakers on this? No. So we have a recommendation that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 and 2 and 1 informative. Would all those in favour of the recommendation please show? Yes, thank you very much. That was unanimous. Now, Adam, would you take us quickly through the listed planning consent, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the plans are duplicate from the previous presentation, so I'll skip through just to the site photographs of where we can look in. This is the listed building consent required in association with the full permission for the conversion, as the outbuilding question is curtilage listed due to being within the curtilage of a Grade 2 listed building. The significance of the heritage asset is that Springfield Farm is a late 16th century timber framed house which has been altered and extended throughout the course of its life. The outbuilding subject of this application is mid to late 19th century and was originally in use as a cattle shed. The building has been heavily altered throughout its history, and as a result, this has been heavily domesticated. And in consultation with our heritage conservation team, they've identified no harm to heritage assets. Officers are recommending this application for approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
So, councillors, do we have any speakers? No. So we have a recommendation that the listed planning consent is also granted subject to 1 condition and 1 informative. Would all those in favour of the recommendation please show? Unanimous, thank you very much. So That was 4 minutes
Not bad.
with a comfort break. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll meet again soon. Thank you.